Can we prove that God exists? Let's consider. Hello, philosophers. I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Channel. Summary of the Summa Theologica. Today we're looking at Part 1, Question 2, Article 2, whether it can be demonstrated that God exists. Some people think that you can't prove God exists. It's something you have to take totally on faith, and that's it. For Aquinas, although it's definitely the case that you could just take this on faith, he also thinks that you can show that God exists. And to support this, he gives Romans 1:20, the invisible things of God are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. So in other words, we can know the invisible things of God because of the things that he made. Two, the first thing we must know of anything is whether it exists. So of all the invisible things of God, the fact that he exists is the number one thing that we have to know. Three, so this presupposes the existence of God could be demonstrated through the things that are made. Now in this article, Aquinas distinguishes between a priori and a posteriori reasoning. And he says that when you go from the cause and you demonstrate something, then that is a priori. When you go from the effect and demonstrate something, that's a posteriori. The a priori goes from what is prior absolutely. The cause is prior to the effect, so absolutely prior. And then whenever you go from a posteriori, starting from the effect, you're starting from what is prior to us, right? Something that we know first. Like we might know the effects before we know the cause, so we reason from the effects. That's a posteriori reasoning. By the way, the distinction between a priori and a posteriori reasoning is something that's famous in philosophy. It's not going to look exactly the same way in Aquinas that it looks like in, let's say, Immanuel Kant. So just so you know, if you see these terms somewhere else, they might be a little bit different than they are here. So if we know the effect better than we know the cause, then we reason back from knowledge of the effect back to knowledge of the cause. Now, with that in place, here's his argument for his position. 1, every effect depends upon its cause. 2, so if the effect exists, then the cause must pre-exist, must exist before. 3, so if we know the effects, we can demonstrate the existence of the proper cause. 4, God's effects are known to us. 5, so the existence of God can be demonstrated from the existence of his effects. So why think that we can prove God exists? Because we have knowledge of the effects of God, which is basically creation, right? We know the creation, the effects of God, so we can reason backwards to the existence of its proper cause. Now, exactly what this reasoning backwards from the effect to the cause looks like in the case of reasoning from creation back to the creator, we're going to find out in the next article. In the next article, he's going to give 5 arguments for the existence of God, famously known as the 5 ways. But again, we'll see that in the next article. For right now, let's look at some objections. Objection 1, a demonstration produces scientific knowledge. Again, scientific not meaning natural science like biology, physics, but just meaning an organized body of knowledge. 2, faith is of the unseen. And here he's quoting Hebrews 11:1. 3, so what is of faith cannot be demonstrated, cannot be proved. 4, it is an article of faith that God exists. 5, so it cannot be demonstrated that God exists. Now, this is probably what most of you who are interested in this question are worried about. Isn't it the case that the existence of God is something that I just have to have faith in? Isn't it something that, I can't prove, that I'm not supposed to prove? I just am supposed to believe in? His reply to this is to go after premise 4. So he thinks that the existence of God is not an article of faith. It is a preamble to the faith. So what is the difference between these two? Well, the articles of the faith are these fundamental beliefs that you have to have in order to be a Christian. And these are things that you can find in the Bible, such as his first one is the unity of God. God is one. So that's in the Bible. It's something that you have to believe in because the Bible says so. If you didn't believe these things, then you just wouldn't be a Christian, right? There's got to be some stuff that you have to believe in order to be a Christian. Otherwise, the name Christian would just be meaningless, right? If there was nothing you had to believe, no fundamental beliefs that you had to believe in order to be a Christian, then you could be, rejecting Jesus. You could say that, this microphone is Jesus and follow that and call yourself a Christian, right? It would be a meaningless term. So the fundamental beliefs, those are the articles of faith. The preambles of faith are things that you have to know prior to coming to the faith, to the articles of faith. So what does this mean? And he says that the faith presupposes natural knowledge. What does that mean? So the existence of God is something that you have to know prior to believing that God is one, right? In order to believe that God is one in the first place, this article of faith, you have to know that God exists. Otherwise, it makes no sense to say God is one. So a preamble to the faith would be something like that you have to take in, to bring to the table ahead of time. He doesn't think that you have to prove necessarily the preambles of the faith. He thinks that you can take these on faith as well if you need to, because not everybody's going to be able to sit down and do a bunch of philosophy and prove that God exists or anything like that. But then the point is that there's nothing to say that we can't prove these things just because some people have to take it on faith. That doesn't preclude us from being able to prove these things. So you might be left thinking, okay, the preambles of the faith are things that we know ahead of time or can just have faith in. The articles of faith, however, those are things that we just have to have faith in. Those are things that we can't know, right? Actually, in the second part, he says that we can know ahead of time some of the articles of faith. So, for example, the unity of God, he says that some natural philosophers have proved that God is one. So they knew it ahead of time. They didn't need the articles of faith. So that may leave you thinking, well, then what is the difference between the preamble of the faith and an article of the faith? Aquinas is just working off of an accepted list that he has of the articles of the faith. But I have to say, not everybody throughout Christianity has the same accepted list of articles of the faith. So I think it's an open question on whether this is supposed to be a preamble of the faith or an article of the faith. And really, I don't even think it matters. I think his real response here is that you can show something exists and then you could take it on faith too if you want to. There's nothing to preclude that, I think that's the real response. And this is shown as he constantly points to by the fact that, natural philosophers before him, before Christianity, had proved things like the existence of God and the oneness of God and things like that. So I would like to say one additional thing though. Aquinas sounds like he's saying you philosophers come at the existence of God with knowledge, and then from there you take certain things on faith. I would just caution you on being so confident in your reasoning skills that you're going to base your entire faith on your ability to prove the existence of God. And I don't mean to disparage the arguments for the existence of God. I think that they have actually helped me in my faith, and they've helped other people as well. However, I've gone through some seasons of intense anxiety and depression. And in those seasons, I've not been able to feel the confidence in my own reasoning ability that I normally feel. And it's because that's just something that goes along with that. I don't know if you want to say disease or what, but with that malady or whatever you want to call it. In those times, I struggled because I was constantly, thinking like, what if I'm wrong? Did I make a mistake somewhere? These arguments are great, but like, I don't know, like, could I be wrong about them? And that's not to take away from these arguments. It's just that, sometimes you don't have that confidence. So let me give you another example. We have a Sprinter van that's diesel, and we have a Jeep Wrangler. So one day I was getting gas and I was listening to a podcast, and I filled up the gas in the Sprinter van and put it back. And oh my gosh, I realized, thank goodness, before I started the engine, I had put gas in the tank instead of diesel. And oh my gosh, that cost us like $1,500. It cost us an insane amount of money to get fixed, to get the gas tank pumped. That was such a traumatic experience that to this day, when I'm putting in gas on either car, I swear to you, like I will stare. First of all, I don't listen to podcasts while I refuel my car anymore. But second of all, I will be looking dead at the thing and say like, okay, this one's diesel. I'll turn it on. I'll turn away for just like a second, and a panic will strike me. Like, did I use diesel? Like I'll all of a sudden doubt, like, is my memory wrong? And it was just like a moment ago, but it's possible that my memory was wrong, right? So I'll freak out and turn around. Is that diesel? I'll be looking dead at it and being like, are my eyes deceiving me? Like that. This is how traumatic of an experience it was. But so what I'm saying is, like, it would have been much better in these awful times had I just chosen to believe and put all my faith in God and not try to build my faith off of my reasoning skills. Again, these arguments are not bad. I'm not saying that they're bad. I'm just saying that what you want to do, you want to start off, and I'm just learning this, by the way. So I'm just putting this into practice. So don't think that like I have this nailed down, but what you want to do is you want to start off by just choosing to believe. And from there, you study these arguments and they support your belief. They show you, yes, indeed, God does exist. But you don't want to put all your eggs in that basket, because there are going to be those days where you're like, but, did I make a mistake somewhere in my logic? I don't know. It's crazy. Okay, let's look at objection 2. Objection 2 starts off, the essence is the middle term of the demonstration. So the middle term, take a syllogism like all ducks are birds, all birds have wings, therefore all ducks have wings. And the middle term there is birds. Why is that? Because the term ducks and the term wings previously were unconnected, but they were connected through this middle term of birds. That term birds connected the two terms ducks and wings so that we get our conclusion. Okay? Now, birds is part of the essence of ducks. It's part of what a duck is. So the point in this premise is, in order to use this term birds, we have to know what birds is. We have to know the essence of birds. Premise 2, we cannot know in what God's essence consists. And here he quotes John Damascene, we can only know in what God's essence doesn't consist. So I've already mentioned this before, but just as a quick review, God's essence is infinite, right? God is an infinite being. So what is an infinite being like? Can we know what that is essentially? No, that is incomprehensible to us. The best that we can do is to say, well, it's being, so he bees like us, right? But when we be in a finite way, we be with limitations. And so his being must not be limited. It's unlike us in this way. So notice that I'm getting a positive knowledge about God, but in a negative way by denying what God is like. I'm saying he's not like us in this way. But for that reason, we can't say that we know the essence of God. So we cannot demonstrate that God exists. If we're going to use God in a proof for the existence of God, we're going to use that term, God, in this proof for the existence of God, and it's going to be a middle term, then we're going to need to know the essence of God, and we don't know the essence of God. That's the argument here. The reply is that the question of the essence of a thing follows the question of its existence. So to know what a thing is comes after knowing that it is, right? You can't be a what until you actually exist. 2, so in order to prove the existence of a thing, it's necessary to accept as a middle term the meaning of the word and not its essence. So if we're going to prove that something exists, then instead of using its essence for a middle term, because again, that comes after the existence, we're going to have to use the meaning of the word. And here we're talking about a nominal definition, right? Something that's going to point to the thing, but is not going to necessarily tell us what the essence of the thing is. 3, when the existence of a cause is demonstrated from an effect, the effect takes the place of the definition of the cause in proof of the cause's existence. So now in this specific instance, when we are proving the existence of a thing from its effects, then in the place of the essence of the thing, we'll throw in the effects. So let's say that there was a murder, and you look on the ground at this murdered individual and you think to yourself, how did this happen? I don't see anything around, I don't see the murder weapon. I don't know what did this. Well, what we will do is look at the effects of the murder weapon. And when we refer to the murder weapon, we're referring to whatever did that, right? And so the effects are going to take the place of what the murder weapon was. And in fact, we can go from there to reason not only about the existence, there must be a murder weapon because something did this damage. We can also go from there and reason about some additional information about the murder weapon, whether it was a blunt object or a sharp object, for example, something like that. Now, the names given to God are derived from his effects, right? The way that we know God is from his creation. That's the first thing we know, is that God is the creator of the universe. And this is how we have our natural knowledge of him. So, in demonstrating the existence of God from his effects, we may take for the middle term the meaning of the word God. So when we're proving that God exists, instead of the essence of God standing in there for that term God, we're going to use the meaning of the word, and the meaning of the word here is going to be just depending upon the effects of God, right? We're going to use those effects to go back and define the cause. Objection 3. If the existence of God were demonstrated, this could only be from his effects. So this is what we've already said, right? Aquinas does not believe you can argue a priori. This was in the last article, right? He doesn't think that you can prove God exists a priori, only from his effects. 2, God is infinite and his effects are finite. Okay. 3, there is no proportion between the finite and the infinite. 4, so God's effects are not proportionate to him. Okay. 5, a cause cannot be demonstrated by an effect that is not proportionate to it. So what does this mean? Well, let's say we see that murdered victim, and instead of seeing a blunt object type of damage, we see a bullet hole, and we see an exit wound. All right. Now, I look at the exit wound, and from the exit wound, let's say I was, this professional CSI type person, I could reason backwards to the power of the gun and the bullet, maybe the bullet type, stuff like that, because the effect is proportionate to the cause, right? The power of the gun is going to be proportionate to the hole size, something like that. But when we're talking about God as an infinite being and him creating things, we can't look at the things around that he's created and say, oh, well, given the way that this stuff is, here must be the power of God. This is what God must be exactly, because God could always create more. This infinite being is not proportionate to the finite creation that he's made, like the bullet and gun would be proportionate to the hole in the murder victim. 6, so the existence of God cannot be demonstrated. His reply to this is, you're right. We can't look at the effects and reason back and say this is exactly what the cause must have been like, right? We can't say that God must have exactly this much power because he gave exactly this much effect. Because he could never exhaust his power, right? So it doesn't matter how much he created, we could never be able to say, now this is the full extent of God's power. There would always be able to be more. But we can, at the very least, he says, reason to the existence of the thing, right? Just because we can't reason backwards to get the right proportion and say this is what it's like, doesn't mean that we can't say, well, it existed, So at the very least, we can prove that God exists, even if we can't prove this is exactly what God is in his essence. So we can prove God exists using his effects. We just can't prove everything about God. That is it for this article. Please let me know if you have any questions on it. And otherwise, I will see you in the next article, which is one of the most famous ones, his arguments for the existence of God. He gives 5. They are famously called the 5 ways. So get excited for that, and I'll see you in that video. Adios.